Show Unplugged, where we answer all the hard questions. And on the phone with us today, this is the first time we've did a phone interview since we've redone the studio. But hey, that's great. On the phone with us today is a cousin that I didn't even know that I had. I knew that we were related, but hey, come to find out, he told me more about my family history than I knew. But anything, he's a TV star, he is a movie star, he's a famous singer. I can't tell you what all he's been involved in, but I'm sure he'll tell us tonight. I'd like to introduce you to Randall Franks from Ringgold,
Hello, Chuck.
Georgia. Hey, cuz, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to be with you tonight.
Well, I hope that this is not going to be just the first time you pop up here on the WOTG and Branson Gospel and all the other activities that I have around. But it's great to finally get to have an interview with you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I hope folks who are tuning in or listening will find something interesting that they didn't know.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, you sent me a picture of my grandmother. And to me, you couldn't you it's like you give me $1,000,000, Bubba. It really made my day.
Well, we're blessed in our family. All of us are blessed. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Is something that I say often. We had some great folks in our family, and of course, I shared with you in the past is we had a musical family, at least in that generation. My great grandfather and yours as well, A.J. Harv Franks, he was a fiddle player. He came to Catoosa County, Georgia with his fiddle and the clothes on his back. And he convinced a pretty young lady to become his wife. And that's where this branch of the family started out. And of course, your grandmother was his daughter, and my grandfather was his son. And of course, they were one of a very large family, and all the brothers and sisters were influenced by his music.
When you told me that he had that the grandfather had played the fiddle and my grandmother played the piano, I just sit back and I said, man, if I could have just been there to hear them play, that would have been totally awesome.
Yeah, it really would have. And, we had, I understand our Uncle Henry played the banjo. And then, of course, my grandfather, he was probably the least musical in the bunch. I understand he played the juice harp.
Really?
So he did. And then, the different brothers, of course, Uncle Tom, he was the fiddle player. He learned to play from his dad, and he continued that throughout his life. And he taught a lot in his family how music. In fact, Uncle Tom was who I saw as a young boy at family reunions playing. He and his daughter Ruth and some of their other family members used to come and play at the reunion, and that's sort of what inspired me, and that's how I learned about the musical history was by being around those folks as children. But it's fascinating. I've often said that the early influences that people have in life can impact what what they do with their lives, and I think that's how I wound up in music and eventually wound up in acting because I wouldn't have gotten the opportunities in television had it not been for getting to, let's say, rise up in the ranks of the music industry, and none of that would have started without the fiddle. It all goes back to that. So I owe my whole career to, in actuality, my great grandfather and yours, passing down that music from generation to generation and giving me the opportunity to say, well, I want to do that. That's interesting. And then finding people who would teach me. Of course, I
What?
wasn't around Uncle Tom, so I wasn't able to learn from him. Although I do have, thankfully, some recordings of him that I can listen back to. But
Wow. Well, the one thing that um, I didn't even know Grandma existed because nobody shared her on our side of the family. And my grandmother died at a very early age. She was like 36 years old. And then my papa, Sanford, he passed away at the age of 42. And I went over there to the graveyard. I found grandma by accident. And I don't know if mom ever, because mom was all that with the genealogy just like you are. And so I found her on findagrave.com, and I was looking up my papa Sanford, which is her son, and I looked her up. I looked him up, and then there, of course, it was Papa Gudger, and then beside Papa Gudger was Mama, and I'm going, wow. So I knew where Papa Noah was buried, Sanford, and I went to the graveyard, and it's like I knew where she was. And then not one time did I ever think that to find where Grandma and Grandpa Frank's was, and they're buried right beside her. And I
right,
thought, huh?
right, yes, they're in the same cemetery there. Yeah,
They're all right. And how can a grandson walk in and see the Noah Sanford and Mamaw Sanford there, which is Papa Gudger's mom and dad, and my grandma right there, and then you turn right there, and then there's my great grandmother and my great grandfather on the Frank side of the family. And Randall,
well,
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it's, families were, of course, back in those days, they were together, and it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
unusual for the, generation after generation to not only live together or by each other, and but they were buried near each other or next to each other in the same cemeteries. Um, as time went along, and of course, it wasn't that far apart. Their passings too.
Yeah.
That in time.
I always tried to figure out what happened to Grandma. I know that she died early in the morning, but I never did find out what she died of. She died like 7 something in the morning. I seen her death certificate.
Yeah, I never heard the story of how she passed away. Some of the family members, those stories got passed along. I'm assuming it was just it was an illness of some kind, but that I just don't know. Like we had one of our uncles, he drowned. So his story got passed.
Yeah.
Many times in the family. Uh, but and it was obviously a tragedy in that respect because he was a very young man.
Well,
But yeah, so you learn those as they get passed, and of course for their contemporaries, they remember them, and that sticks with them, and they repeat those stories again and again. Of course, that's where we get family stories, and that in a lot of ways, uh, Chuck, is how the music that we, the folk music and the things that we pass the stories through music, and that's another one of the things that sort of drew me into the music when I was growing up. Is I just realized, I have a love of history, and we're talking about our family history, and I'm sure folks outside of our immediate family are probably not enthralled too much by that, but those are the stories that people pass sitting around the fireplace, around the kitchen table. Is what turned into the early musics and the early songs. especially if it was whether it was a love song or whether it was just a tale of something that happened in the community, uh, whether it was two people getting into a fight and one of them dying, and those kinds of things are what got passed down. And music was a way to sort of keep those stories going further and further on down the generations. And
Well,
of course, a lot of people wrote music related to their faith,
yeah.
and we sing a lot of those songs. So many were blessed and inspired by the Word of God, and turned that into something that we continue to sing today in our churches.
Well, I'm gonna tell you right now. When you handed me the CD and the story behind the story, how us two met, I knew that we were related. I didn't know how close we were related, but I knew that we were related. I knew that you were on the heat of the night. I know that you have done a lot for Ringgold and Tunnel Hill and the surrounding areas. And my pastor told me, before I forget, my pastor told me to tell you hello,
Oh, great!
Rick Talent.
Yes, yes.
But anyway, and just the history that behind the scenes of Randall Franks. So tell us a little bit, Randall, about you and how you got into the gospel music, country music, and um, all the other stuff that you're involved in.
Okay, Chuck. Well, first give your pastor my best back
I
to him when
will.
you speak to him again. Uh, and but my road, as I mentioned, started with the fiddle, and early on, I took that instrument up. My parents were supportive, and mother worked at some extra hours, rented me a violin. Of course, they'd rented it because they didn't know how serious I was about learning to play. Um, and eventually, I realized that I wasn't going to learn what I wanted to learn to play because I signed up for classical violin. There had been a gentleman by the name of Dr. Reiser come into my elementary school room, and he, was there to try to get people to sign up for classical violin. And of course, he played the Orange Blossom Special. So I signed up, and I started taking the lessons that he was teaching with all of the other young people in the school, and I realized, well, that he wasn't going to teach me how to play Orange Blossom Special. He was going to teach me Beethoven and Brahms and Bach and Mozart. I finally had to go out and find some fiddle players to learn what I really wanted to learn to play like my Uncle Tom did. And so I did that, and eventually, over time, it was a blessing, though, that I was in that group of young people that he brought on. This gentleman, he taught in all the schools in our county. So we all interacted, all of the people in the string program, and from those young people in the string program throughout the county, we had several who had an interest in the traditional Appalachian music, and they wanted to do something a little different than what they were being taught. And we started gathering at the homes of our parents on Friday evenings, and we would have jam sessions. And many of the older, um, let's say, the stars who were in we all were in the Atlanta area at that time, and many of the stars who came up on dance would come to our jam sessions. Now, for those who are not old enough to know, the Grand Ole Opry is what we look to today as being the radio show of the stars. Well, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and even starting in the 20s, there were shows like the Grand Ole Opry throughout the country. And one of those, the one in Atlanta, was the WSB barn dance. There was the Louisiana Hayride in Shreveport. There was a show on WLS out of Chicago. There was a show in Wheeling, West Virginia, which continues. They still have the Wheeling Jamboree today. But all of these shows across the country, stars were created on those various shows, and they travel around the country. And but at the WSB Barn Dance, it was actually what we considered back in those days. It was the bigger show. It was even bigger than the Grand Ole Opry because they paid their talent more, and it gave them a greater ability to get out. Plus, being on WSB on those what were 50,000-watt stations back in those days, reached all for all the way across, halfway across the country, essentially, because there were clear airwaves. There were
Right.
fewer radio stations. So a lot of the folks like Cotton and Jane Carrier and different ones who had been stars on the barn dance would come to our jam session, and they taught us. They were teaching us how to interact, and they would play with us, and that's how we got started, and that's where my first group came from. I formed a band out of those young people, and we started going playing flea markets, churches, festivals, and within a few years, that group of young people who were age 9 through 13, we eventually reached the Grand Ole Opry, and I started gaining attention in country music as a result of that. We had our own opportunities to be on television. We did a number of different TV shows. In the 1983, we did a show called the Country Kids TV series, which was basically a children's hee-haw that showed on stations around the world back in those days. So these were the ways that the opportunities came. We got the Grand Ole Opry. There wasn't a lot of many things in country music back in those days that teenagers could do, as far as, because most of country music was in the clubs.
Right.
And so the Opry and Opryland was pretty much the only place you could, as a young person, you could hope to get some traction, I would say. And thankfully, we did get some traction, and they kept me around for quite a while, guest starring and doing different things for the Opry. And that recognition allowed me to cross over and start doing movies. And my first role was in a movie called Desperate for Love with Christian Slater and Brian Bloom, and it was centered around the high school choir. And I sang in the choir. That was the extent of my role. Of course, did some scenes with everybody and around the choir. The storyline was the choir went to sing at on a television station, if I remember it correctly. So we took this little trip. So you see all of the high schoolers in various scenes as we're going on this progress. It turned out to be a little love triangle story between Brian Bloom and Tammy Lauren and Christian Slater, and it was one of those CBS movies of the week back years ago. But we had a lot of fun being part of that. That allowed me to start that crossover into doing film and television and acting. Of course, I started studying that aspect of what I wanted to do as well at that time, and within a year, more or less, the people who were involved in that production and a couple of others that I was able to be a part of were involved in the heat of the night when they started that production in Georgia, and they brought me to be a part of that. So I think it was God's providence that brought me to be a part. There wasn't anything for me to do initially when they brought me on the scene. I got a call from the casting director and said, "Well, they're bringing this show. They brought this show from Louisiana to Georgia, and we want you to go down and want you to be there the first day of filming. Just go be an extra, just be a townsperson, and you'll we think they're going to like you, is what they said. Says, okay. And I went. So 5 o'clock, I'm down there on the set. It's dark, and standing outside the wardrobe trailer, and this man walks by and looks me up and down and said, "You look an awful lot like a police officer." I said, "Well, thank you." And he went on his way. I didn't know who it was. And so they came out, looked at my clothes, said, "Okay, yeah, this will work. This will work." I got into clothes they wanted me to wear, and then I worked the day. Well, that day I got to meet Carol O'Connor, and they put me in a scene with Carol. Of course, I got to meet Alan Autry and David Hart and Jeffrey Thorne. That was his first day of work on the show. He had just been hired to work on the show. Howard Rollins, and of course Hugh O'Connor. And those were that very first day I met everybody. And of course, when you work on movie sets, especially as an extra, the rule is you don't talk to the actors unless they speak to you. So I was very blessed in that I was there in while I was waiting for them to do something. The country boy I found a log laying in the middle of the woods, and I went over and sat down on it. And next thing I knew, I got Alan sitting on one side of me and David Hart sitting on the other side of me, and we got to talking. And so, so they opened up that ground, and that began a great friendship with those folks, and of course with eventually Jeff and Hugh joined us as well. And of course, doing the scene with Carol, he opened up the opportunity to talk with him, and that just began what they kept bringing me back over a period of weeks. And then they came to me and said, "Well, we're going to add a police character to the show, and we want you to be it." So I think God put me there, and He allowed me to be a presence and share with them who I was. And He created that opportunity for me, and then I got to stay for 5 years and be on NBC, and then eventually moved to CBS when the show moved to CBS. And of course, do all the different movies that have come over the subsequent 25, 30 years now.
Wow.
Have been all part of that. So it's all building up from that. My mother going down to Lewis music store and renting that violin for me to start to learn to play. It all sort of goes along that little progression there. Everything that's come has been a part of that.
Well, I'll tell you right now, I had to I got to interview one of the, besides yourself, I think probably one that wrote the song "Devil Went Down to Georgia." I got to interview him in 2019 before he passed away, and of course, that was Charlie Daniels. And you had told me that you had played with Charlie Daniels. Am I right on that, or am I
Oh
mistaken?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
Charlie was a great friend to me, and he supported my efforts and did it. One of my greatest memories is Charlie playing the guitar so I could fiddle. So, and a lot of people don't realize, because he's known for playing that his big hit there on the fiddle, but he started out as a guitar player, or at least that's really how he was a sideman in
Mm-hmm.
Nashville working with other entertainers playing guitar. But very nice man, and I thought the world of Charlie, and had the opportunity to get to know and be around him. Of course, like I said, get to play shows with him, and that was a lot of fun. Um, and of course, also back years ago, of course, he had the song "The Devil Went Down to Georgia." Well, one of my biggest songs is a song called "The Old Black Fiddle," which I wrote as a prequel to "The Devil Went Down to Georgia." So it's a story of the fiddle that Johnny played in the song. So
Wow.
if you listen to that song, "The Old Black Fiddle," then you'll hear sort of the backstory to The Devil Went Down to Georgia, and in a way that also connects to our great grandfather, uh, because that's the way his fiddle was described to me, and that's where the title came from, and the description, the old black fiddle, because he played an old black fiddle. That was how his fiddle was described. I never saw the fiddle, but that was how it was described to me as
Wow.
a child, and that stuck with me. So that's one of the tunes, I guess you would say, that I've written that it connects to Charlie Daniels, also connects to our family history in a way.
Well, I envy you so much because um, after seeing Papa Franks, he is just, I mean, he just looks like a very humble man. And I've seen other pictures of him. He's so humble. And I just adore him in the pictures that I've seen of Papa. And but the thing that the things I would just like to be there as they got around the kitchen table and with their banjo and their juice harp and their fiddle and the piano and all that stuff, and just on a Friday or Saturday night just banging away, because I'd heard Papa. And if y'all are wondering who we're talking about when I say my Papa was Deward Sanford, and my grandmother, her name was Ethel Sanford, and my grandfather was named Gudger Sanford. That is correct. I did say that right, did I not?
Yes,
Okay.
that's my memory. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was one of the things, Randall, that I do is I go by I'm coming home from church. I come home from church, and the first thing that I'll do before I come home is I'll go by Mama's grave, and I'll go past my Mama and Papa Sanford, and I'll go past Papa and Mama's grave on the Frank side, and I'll just say, hey, in the history that, from what you've been saying about the family history, I can't even. My grandfather bought me a guitar in the early 70s and give it to me because he passed away um, in 76, and then Uncle Grady died in 77, and then Uncle Doc died in 1980. And it seems like they were all so close together, those deaths. But the one thing that Papa gave me that guitar, and then when I was in 78, 7 years, 5 years, or ever how long it was, Papa gave me that guitar. I was trying to learn to play it. And if I would have stayed with it, there's no telling what I'd be doing today. I didn't like the way it made my fingers feel. And
Yeah, you have to get used to that and build up those calluses. So
the teacher I had was Mr. Hendricks, and he was probably one of the greatest people I ever knowed. That he was our choir director at West Union in Ohio, and he was probably one of the best at that time. And he was teaching me, and I just wouldn't, or maybe it was at Manchester High School or Manchester when I was in junior high. I wouldn't stick with it. I wanted to learn how to play the trumpet. I wanted to be a trumpet player like Louis Armstrong, and I loved how that's my background into that. And I got to spend some time down in Louisiana and down in the French Quarter and everything else, listening to the people that would play at what they used to call the jute joints and the little clubs that were on the side. You get to hear them. Well, I wasn't at the age where I could go in, so I'd sit out at Jackson Square or sit outside on the street and listen to them play, because down in New Orleans, that they just opened up the doors and played instruments, and that's where I got my love for jazz. And the one thing that I really got turned on about you was at our my aunt's funeral back in November, which was your cousin, and I had no idea that, like I said before, I knew we was related. We've been friends on Facebook for years, but I had no idea that Aunt Lisa knew who you were. And when their kids found out, when her two children found out who you were, Nicholas and Lee, both, that's all they talk about. That we got a family member that was a movie star and everything else. And it's great to get to know you. And I heard something, and I wanted to ask you about this. Um, you helped get together the big concert thing that they have in Ringgold. Is that true? The 1800 days.
Or you mean the 1890s
Yeah,
jamboree?
yeah,
Well, yes, I've helped that with that for many years now. Uh, that was originally brought together with a committee of folks in Ringo back in the 70s.
yeah.
And then Dr. Ronald Graham is a dentist in town, and he's coordinated it for many, many years. But for roughly the last 20 years or so, I've helped uh, with it. As far as I've served on the various committees, and whether it was the maybe bringing the talent to the main stage or helping coordinate the fiddle contest that we held for many years. We don't do that anymore, but sort of had a hand in various aspects of it through the years. But 1890s Days always a great event in Ringo. It's always Memorial Day weekend, Friday night and Saturday. Gospel singing on Friday night. Saturday, there's music on three stages, and then, of course, all kinds of activities and crafts. So, great thing for people to come to do if they've never been to Ringo, want to come and see what it's like. It's just a good old fashioned small town fair, I guess you would call it, and we just have a great time every year with that. Um, the Also, we have shows at the Ringo Depot. For many years, I held gospel concerts there. We don't do those anymore, but we do once a month. We would do a gospel show, and I have a lot of the various gospel acts come in, from the Singing Echoes to the Florida Boys to a lot of different groups through the years. The Watkins family, um, who would come and perform, and we raise money for our Pearl and Floyd Frank Scholarship Fund, that we give scholarships to young students who are pursuing Appalachian music through that our Share America Foundation program. So those are things that still are dear to my heart. We had our last concert at the Colonnade last October, raising funds for that effort, and still doing that. Folks can learn more about that by visiting our website, our ShareAmericaFoundation.org website, and they might have a young person that they need to have a little help when they go to college, and they play the fiddle or the mandolin or the banjo or something of that nature, and that's what it's for. And of course, they can learn more about what I've done by going to randallfranks.com, and you can learn. I tell people that if you can Google Randall Franks and be bored for hours. So that's the same is true with our website. You can visit there. You can read all about my. We've got it divided up. You can look at the acting bio. You can look at the country music, the gospel, the bluegrass. Because I've played in so many different genres and performed with. I've counted up before. I've probably worked with had in excess of 40 Hall of Famers in country, rock and roll, bluegrass, and gospel music. In some way. Whether I recorded with them in the studio, played with them on stage, produced them. In some way, I've had a part in their legacy, and I've really been blessed in that respect. And every excuse me, everything in that's happened to me in music in Nashville, of course, once again, I believe it's all God's opening the doors to
Yeah.
make it possible. Anything that's come to pass, but He puts encouragers in your life, and I wrote a whole book series. There's 3 volumes that I call Encouragers, and in that I highlight the stories of many of the everyday folks and actors and entertainers who played a role in my life and allowed me to get a little bit farther based on what they input into my life. Just like I talked about Cotton and Jane Care of the WSB Barn Dance. Well, they were encouragers in my childhood. Dr. Greiser, the guy who started me on the violin, Uncle Tom. Those are all just, it may have been simply a word. Of course, the people from In the Heat of the Night, Carol O'Connor, a huge encourager, Alan Autry. Um, they became part of my life, pushing me forward, investing in my life, and so many others. Even a lot of people wouldn't think about someone like Bob Hope. Well, Bob Hope was an encourager in my life,
Wow.
and I feature him in my show in the first volume of the book because it was early in my life that he took an interest in young fiddle players. So um, there's so many folks like that are I feature in that book series, but um, 2 key acts which were instrumental in bringing me to a national stage. Well, actually, there's 3. Um, Josh Graves. A lot of people may not know that name unless you're a bluegrass um, fan. Josh Graves was the dobro player for Flatt and Scruggs, and of course he had a career in his own right. And during that time, he was my first, what I consider my first professional gig, other than the group of young people that I put together as my band. So I went and played a gig with him, and that opened the doors for other professional musicians to see me playing with him. And Bill Monroe was one of those people, and so Bill
Wow.
Monroe then took an interest in me and as a fiddle player, and started mentoring me, and brought me to Nashville, and then brought my band to the Grand Ole Opry, and eventually I also worked with him and his band in addition to that, but started me guest starring for the Opry back. I had 40 years ago this year, 40 years ago that he started mentoring me. So has passed very quickly, but in those 40 years, God has put a lot of different people in my life that have opened doors and created opportunities in film and television and music. Just like, I got from Bill Monroe mentoring me to, so a few years ago, like we talked about, playing with Charlie Daniels and
Yeah.
having him play guitar for me so that I could fiddle. Things of that nature, and that's just one of the many that through the years who have played a part. And of course, folks can find those books at the store at randallfranks.com if they're interested in that. There's also recipes in there from some of the celebrities. Even folks like Dolly Parton are in the are have been encouragers in my life. And I worked with Dolly, co-starred with her in a movie some years ago, and so there are many different people who have played a role along the way, and I'm sure there'll be more if it be God's will that there'll be more opportunities both in film and television. We've got more movies coming up in the future, and of course, right now I'm working on new books. I've got a new devotional that I'm working on, a 30-day devotional. I've got a new novella, I guess they would call it, because it's a short novel that I'm working on, and got new music coming out. So all those things are positive momentum for the kingdom, let's say.
Amen. Well, one of my back when I was a child, my uncle Bob, he's like one of my best friends. He's my dad's brother. He handed me an 8-track tape back in 71. And to me, that was the greatest 8-track that I ever had in my life. And I had it up until I guess I was in high school. And it's just one of those things why I don't need this anymore and I wish I still had it. And he gave me an 8-track tape of Jerry Reed. And that's where my love for country music came through was from Jerry Reed. And I never got to meet him, but I have got to meet some people that knew him. And one of the people that I've got to meet in my lifetime has been Richard Kaiser. I don't know if you know Richard or not.
No, I don't. I don't know Richard.
Richard is, I'll have to introduce you to him one time. Richard is one of those people that can pick up the guitar. And I mean, he's like Chet Atkins. As a matter of fact, Chet Atkins was one of his mentors. And Richard can sit there and I mean, he makes just like you are with the fiddle, but he's like that with the guitar. And he can just make the guitar talk. And I've seen him do it with um, he does it with an old, I think it's old 58 or old 59 Fairlane muffler system that he'll do in the system. He has a little gig with it and everything else, but it's the things that y'all can do that is the history behind the history of everything. And again, our families go back so far back into the to a lot of the my family, and I'm sure your family was too, was ridge runners. And I always tell the story about my grandfather. He was a ridge runner, and that's what happened to him. But could you imagine being out on one of those hills in the middle of the night when they were making shine, and they're sitting there playing with the banjo or their fiddle or the juice harp? Those are the stories behind the stories that nobody will ever know about. But getting there and doing a jam session with nobody around, but just them. And that'd be awesome if you could go back and hear that type of music from those days. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, and I think there were a lot of great pickers. I was blessed in those early days of trying to learn to play fiddle to be around a lot of the early what we call the Georgia fiddle bands. The performers who were part of those, they were popular in the 20s and 30s and into the 40s. Of course, they sort of, the fiddle bands over time became something else, and we would have considered them to be square dance bands, but they started recording for in the early days of records. Um, I was privileged to work with a group which was considered to be the last of the Georgia fiddle bands. That was the Golden River Grass, and they started in '63 and went until '95. And I worked with them for several years as in the fiddle position. But those learning from people like Low Stokes and hearing those folks play, Clayton McMitchin, of course the Skillet Lickers, Gid Tanner. Gordon Tanner was Gid's son, and I learned from Gordon when I was a boy. Of course, I didn't learn from Lowe and Clayton, but I heard their work. Um, but if you've ever heard the tune "Down Yonder," well, it was Gordon when he was about 13 years old that recorded that. It became one of the biggest selling albums of the Skillet Lickers back in the 1930s. So those are great sounds, and as far as the them picking around the stills, I don't know that they were doing too much of that because they didn't want people to hear where they were.
Right.
But so, but you never know. I'm sure there was some here and there, but the but that's the music, the sounds that came out of the mountains is what's always made me, you know, excited. I've always loved the bluegrass sound. I've loved this what became what is attributed to Monroe and as being the father of bluegrass music. But he, and then of course, the other group I was going to mention is Jim and Jesse. Of course, they came out of uh, the southern part of Virginia, there in the southwestern corner of Virginia and Coburn, and Carfax was actually where they were from, and uh, their their music has always been a part of my life. But they were also there that lifted me up and gave me opportunities, and so those were the two to me more than anybody was Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys and Jim and Jesse. Were the two that were always there for me. In gospel music, it was folks like the Lewis family, and so uh, they were always there. The Primitive Quartet um, were always a part of my life, and so many of the others. The bigger the quartets. Of course, I got to travel with the Marksman Quartet for many years, and so that was and as a result of working with them, then got to play with a lot of the other who we consider the biggest names in Southern gospel music and Christian music. Of course, when Jeff and Cherry Easter started out, I was their fiddle player. So a lot of gospel music in my history, and blessed by that, and getting the chance to have um, God use my talents in that field as well. The very first major success He gave me was my first album was a gospel album in Nashville, um, and it was called Handshakes and Smiles, and we came out with that. And it went up the Christian music sales chart. I was the first bluegrass artist to ever go up the charts and be in the top 20 uh, for sales, in
Wow.
Christian music. So that's God, making that possible, and opening those doors and allowing the radio stations to have an interest in a time when they really didn't go for bluegrass music in a lot of Christian radio stations back in those days. But
Well,
a lot of great memories, a lot of good folks that have helped along the way, and very blessed by it. And just like getting to talk with you, Chuck. I know we're related, but even if we weren't, we'd still be talking and doing an interview because I've done interviews all across the United States and Canada and even overseas throughout my career, and that's talking to listeners who have an interest in what you do and want to listen to your music. That's what it's all about, is to share our story and share the gifts that God has given us, and hopefully along the way somebody might be inspired to then take that you've shared with them and encourage other people with their gifts. That's another reason I wrote that book series. That's really the purpose of it. Is it doesn't matter what gifts God has given us. He's given us something that He wants us to give to somebody else and to make a difference in their life. He sends somebody to us every single day that He wants us to influence for His benefit.
you
And
know
that may
the
simply be an uplifting word, or it might be uh, doing a little bit more because we see a need in that person's life, and they need to be guided in a direction closer to Him.
Well, brother, it's coming close to an end. It's been an honor to have you on here tonight, not just because we're related or anything. It's been an honor to get to interview you and find out some of the stuff along the family history and stuff like that. And Rand, I want to have you back. There's some things I want to ask you about your background in music. That I mean, I went to your website. I wasn't bored, but I am going to get your book series because I want to get you to autograph it because it can go into our archive. And I just got a text message from um, Angela Singh that a great preacher bought his first tent here in Dalton, Georgia in 1949. And Elvis tried to get him to come over and do a revival in Memphis. And he told him he would pay him X amount of dollars. And he says, it's not about the money. I work for God. And Pastor Cecil Todd passed away tonight. What a great man of God he was. Very powerful behind it. Did you ever know him, Randall?
No, I didn't. I'm aware of him and knew of his preaching, but I never knew him.
He was an awesome guy. Well, Randall, hold on just one second, and I want to yell at you. I want to talk to you a little bit after we get off. Hey, guys, you've been listening to the Chuck Bryant Show, and tonight was a very special program. Not only just my cousin, my family, great man of God, great fiddle player. I'm gonna tell you right now, the first time I got to hear him was again at my Aunt Lisa's funeral back a few months ago, and it was an honor to get to meet him. I think we stood on the side of the road at the cemetery talking about our family, and he is shared a lot of family history that I did not know, and it's great to know it. Well, guys, and next week we've got another guest, and I've got a couple of guests coming up this week. But it's been an honor to be with you tonight. Randall, thank you so much for stopping by.
Well, thank you, Chuck. Appreciate you having me on. To all of those tuning in, I appreciate you. Thanks for taking the time to listen and learn a bit more about how God has inspired and guided me in my life. And stop by randallfranks.com. Follow us and subscribe on all of the various social media services if you want, from Facebook to YouTube, our YouTube channel, True Social, and everything you can imagine. You can find Randall Franks most anywhere.
And I'm going to try to talk him in to see if we can get him to give us a couple of his videos that we can play on WGHC TV and Branson Gospel. Until next time, my friends, go with God and be praying for the Todd family. What a great ministry Cecil was. And we'll see you again next week here at the same time, 8 o'clock on the WOTG Radio Network and the Chuck Bryant Show Unplugged, where we ask you the hard question. You might need to get a tissue for your issue before it becomes issues. See you next time, guys. I am